Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. Russia launched an exceptionally intense air attack on Kyiv in the early hours of today, using drones, cruise and probably ballistic missiles as the Ukrainian capital suffered its 8th air raid this month. Footage shot overnight shows flashes, explosions over Kyiv's skyline, and civilians were ordered to seek shelter. The mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko, says at least 3 people were injured in the strikes. General Valery Zaluzhnyi, Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine's armed forces, said about 3:30 local time, Ukraine's air force intercepted 18 missiles launched by Russia. After a weeks-long hiatus, Russia in late April resumed its tactic of long-range missile strikes and has launched a flurry of attacks in recent days, often targeting Kyiv. Well, Ukrainian military released drone footage purportedly showing a Russian shell depot exploding in a village near Bakhmut. Ukraine held its first substantial battlefield advances for 6 months. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine said that the Ukrainian army continued to fight Russia in Bakhmut and other places. Since last week, the Ukrainian military has started to push Russian forces back in and around the battlefield city of Bakhmut, its first significant offensive operations since its troops recaptured the southern city of Kherson in November. A motor unit of an elite infantry brigade prepared under the beating May sun of southern Ukraine for a counteroffensive that could define the country's future. In the fields of the country's Dnipropetrovsk region, soldiers practiced assembling and packing away their mortar launchers to maintain their combat readiness. The mortar unit is part of the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade, an elite outfit which fought brutal battles against Russian-backed militias in eastern Ukraine since 2014. The 128th has also fought on several front lines against the Russian army since the full-scale invasion began February 2022. Kyiv says regular Russian units also took part in some of those battles, something Moscow denies. Ukraine is now seeking to turn the tide of the conflict as it touts an impending counteroffensive. Well, Russia has said that its troops for the first time shot down a British Storm Shadow cruise missile fired by the Ukrainian troops. And Ukraine said its troops struck areas where Russian personnel and equipment were deployed. Russia's defense ministry said in its daily briefing on the Ukraine conflict that it had shot down the cruise missile as well as shorter-range US-built HIMARS-launched and HARM missiles. Moscow said on Sunday that Ukraine had used the missiles to strike industrial sites in the Russian-controlled city of Luhansk, east of Ukraine. But elsewhere, Poland has received its initial batch of HIMARS rocket launchers. Polish defense minister said the equipment would be immediately incorporated into the national army and will be deployed to the northeast of the country to strengthen NATO's eastern flank, which borders Russian ally Belarus. The U.S. State Department in February approved the potential sale of long-range missiles, rockets, and launchers to Poland, including 18 HIMARS launchers. Well, earlier this month, the Minister of National Defense of Poland announced that the country will establish a service center for HIMARS rocket launchers in 2023 and is negotiating the details of an order for 500 more. While Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said he hopes to create a jets coalition after Britain promised to supply long-range attack drones when he visited the country yesterday. Meanwhile, Russia takes an extremely negative view of Britain's decision to supply Ukraine with more military hardware, but does not believe London's help will change the course of the conflict. When asked about Britain's military aid, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said, Britain is trying to be one of the leading countries which keeps pumping weapons into Ukraine. He said the impact of Britain's military aid would not be significant and would ultimately only make things worse for Ukraine. He adds that, quote, it cannot have any significant or major impact on the course of the special military operation. For NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg, he said he expects allies to agree on a multi-year program to help Ukraine advance towards NATO military standards at a July summit in Vilnius. Speaking at the Copenhagen Democracy Summit via video link, Mr. Stoltenberg said NATO would help Ukraine move towards NATO membership. Ukraine is striving for eventual NATO membership as it acquires advanced Western weaponry from supporters in the alliance to fight off the Russian invasion. Mr. Stoltenberg also said he plans to leave his post as NATO's Secretary General when his tenure ends in October.
I also expect that we will agree a multi-year program for Ukraine where we will work on how to help Ukraine to transition from Soviet-era standards, doctrines, equipment to NATO standard doctrines and equipment, and to become fully interoperable with NATO. And of course, to do that also helps them to move towards NATO membership. And then I also strongly believe that all allies will state that, of course, the most urgent task now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails, that President Putin does not win this war, because it's only if Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation in Europe that there's any meaning in discussing when and how Ukraine can become a member of the alliance. Exactly what kind of framework, I cannot tell you now. What I can say is that if NATO allies, and especially, of course, the big ones, starts to issue security guarantees bilaterally to Ukraine, we are very close to Article 5. So there's no way to find an easy solution to these issues. The most important thing is to be very strong in our support to Ukraine, so Ukraine prevail as a sovereign, strong, independent nation in Europe. We will also engage with our Asia-Pacific partners. For the second time in our history, we will invite the heads of state and government from Japan, South Korea, New Zealand and Australia to participate. And this demonstrates that we realize that what happens in Asia, in the Pacific, matters for NATO, and therefore we have strengthened our partnership with them. Well, I have made it clear that I have no other plans than to leave this fall. I've already been almost twice as long as originally planned, and that's what I have to say about that.
United Nations Aid Chief Martin Griffiths says efforts will continue in the coming days to extend a deal allowing the safe Black Sea export of Ukraine grain, a pact Russia has threatened to quit May 18 over obstacles to its grain and fertilizer exports. The final two ships are due to leave Ukrainian ports today under the Black Sea deal. The UN and Turkey brokered the Black Sea Agreement July last year to help tackle a global food crisis that has been aggravated by Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, one of the world's leading grain exporters. At the same time, the UN agreed to help Moscow facilitate its own agricultural shipments.
I have set out, I hope you will agree, that continuation of the Black Sea Initiative is critically important, as is recommitment by the parties to its smooth and efficient operation. And we will continue to call on all to meet their responsibilities as the world watches us very closely. In recent weeks, and last week in particular, we have engaged in intensive discussions with the parties to the Black Sea Initiative to secure agreement on its extension and the improvements needed for it to operate effectively and predictably. And these efforts will continue and focus in the coming days. The initiative refers to the export of ammonia, but this has still not yet been realized. Over the past month, we have also, unfortunately, seen a reduction in the volumes of exports moving out of Ukraine's Black Sea ports due to challenging dynamics within the Joint Coordination Center set up by that agreement of 22nd of July last year in Istanbul, and thus a related slowdown in operations.
We call on Putin to stop holding the world's hungry hostage and extend and fully implement the Black Sea Grain Initiative. We again call on Russia to end its attacks on the people of Ukraine and withdraw its forces from Ukraine's territory completely. Russia alone has the power to end the war it senselessly started.
VOA's Anna Chernikova joins me now from Kyiv. Hi, Anna. So good to see you. Talk to us more about this intense airstrikes attack that we heard on Kyiv today.
Good evening. Well, to be honest, I'm in Ukraine. For more, I'm experiencing the war, the full-scale invasion since the very beginning, and I can tell you that this was probably the scariest night since the beginning. It was really, really intense shelling. And it started very fast. So air raid alarm was on at around 2 something, and then in 20 minutes explosions started. So. This is something that was really, really unexpected. And I can tell that it was very loud because a lot of missiles, it was 18 missiles in total that targeted Kyiv. And actually, according to the official information that we have, 6 of those missiles were these Kinzhal aeroballistic missiles, which only Patriot systems can destroy. And the sound of this, of these actions when air defense is that air defense is basically fighting and destroying and shutting down. It was really, really, really. Unexpectedly loud, and it was quite close because, as I already said, all 18 missiles were targeting Kyiv, and basically in every district of the city, and the Kyiv citizens were hearing that. So, and this lasted for around, probably up to 20 minutes. And as we know, now all 18 missiles were destroyed. In addition, 9 drones were also destroyed. And luckily, there are no much damages. Because we can imagine what possibly the damage could have been, and 3 people were reported injured. Unfortunately, some of the debris fell. So the main damage is in one of the districts. 5 districts of Kyiv were affected, and one of the main damage is in the industrial area where 4 buses were destroyed, and a garage area of 200 square meters. Also, some debris fell down in the Kyiv Zoo. According to the mayor, Mr. Klitschko, animals are safe. No one were injured, and animals are getting also mental support today because it was quite a huge stress. And I can tell you that really, for not only for people but also for pets, it was quite a stress today.
I know, Anna, it must have been really frightening. But many wonder as to if this is the nature of Russia, or Russia is acting this way, especially with this missiles last night. If it's in advance with regards to what Kyiv has been calling the counteroffensive. If Russia is responding to that, or responding to the visit by Ukrainian president to the UK, and then the delivery of more weapons from Britain to Ukraine.
I don't think that this is happening because of counteroffensive or because of the visit. This is kind of a tactic that Russian Federation is currently using in Ukraine, and this is not happening just once or twice. The city of Kyiv is under such nighttime attacks for the past months now. But of course, this night it was something unprecedented, and because the density of this attack was just extremely high. But I don't think that we should connect Ukrainian counteroffensive or Ukrainian president meeting and agreeing on additional aid or additional coalitions like JETS coalitions or any other weapon coalitions. If this coalitions or these talks are not happening, this is not going to stop Russian Federation from their tactics. So this is something that goes in parallel. But definitely, we definitely see that this tactic is something that Russia has changed, because for quite a long time there were no attacks of such scale, missile attacks, I mean, across Ukraine and particularly on the capital. But still, we see that this activity goes in line and goes in parallel with all the activities and actions at the front line. So Ukraine, and definitely this is not something that's going to stop Ukrainian officials or Ukraine position in negotiating with allies and in getting more weapons, or will stop Ukraine from getting ready for this active phase of counteroffensive. And we can see already that Ukraine has certain success in the Bakhmut area, which also could be considered as a kind of a counteroffensive operation, not the main one, of course, but certain local ongoing.
And Anna, we understand that the final 2 ships of the grain are due to leave Ukrainian ports today under the Black Sea deal. Is there anything threatening that from happening?
We'll see. Hopefully this would happen. But again, grain deal at this point, well, it's a really big question mark on what's gonna be following these days, because the current deal will finish in a couple of days, and of course, well, everyone is waiting for at least certain results, positive or negative or neutral, from these talks, because what we've heard, and actually not much updates are coming at this point, but what we've heard, the latest we've heard, that negotiations are continue online in the online format, and again, reportedly, according to the members of Ukrainian team in Turkey who participated in this latest negotiations, there are some chances to find certain points of interest and points of let's say agreement to prolong the agreement. But again, nothing was reassured and nothing was confirmed finally. So we're just hoping and just waiting for this final updates to come as soon as possible, because of course this is a very important issue, not only for Ukraine, for the whole world.
Viewers, Anna Janikova joining us from Kyiv. Always a pleasure having you join us, and do continue to stay safe.
Thank you.
Welcome back. A top Chinese envoy has begun a tour of Ukraine, Russia and other European countries in a trip Beijing says is aimed at discussing a political settlement to the Ukraine crisis. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin told a news conference in Beijing that Liu Hui, China's special representative for Eurasian affairs and former ambassador to Russia, will also visit Poland, France, Germany on the multi-day trip, adding that the specifics of Li's itinerary will be released in due course. Li is the most senior Chinese official to visit Ukraine since Russia invaded in February, and his trip could coincide with the beginnings of a long-anticipated counteroffensive by Ukraine to recapture territory seized by Russia. The visit comes weeks after Chinese President Xi Jinping held a phone call with his Ukrainian counterpart, Zelensky, in late April, in the first talks between the two leaders since the war began. Meanwhile, the European Union's chief executive says that Kyiv's own peace plan should serve as the starting point for any efforts to end Russia's war in Ukraine. in comments which coincided with the start of China's political settlement tour of Europe. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen also backed creating a special tribunal to hold Russia to account and said a new register of damage would be launched in The Hague.
Thanks. But when the Ukraine...
I also expect the leaders to rally behind two main principles. The one is that we will keep supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes. And the second principle is nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. As long as it takes must translate basically into stable financial support, of course also beyond 2023, and accelerated military support focused on the now and here, and nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine means very strong support for President Zelensky's peace formula. We should never forget that Ukraine is the country that was brutally invaded, and it's therefore the one that should set out the core principles for just peace.
We are closely following the situation on the battlefield. Ukraine is pushing back the Russian invaders, but fierce fighting continues. Right now, Ukraine needs more military support, and fast. This will be crucial to its counteroffensive. Our member states are working hard to supply Ukraine with more of what they need. We have stood by the people of Ukraine since day one with solidarity and resolve.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says influential countries such as India, Vietnam and South Africa are unwilling to criticize Russia's invasion of Ukraine because they believe international principles are not applied equally. Mr. Scholz made this known while speaking at the Global Solutions Summit in Berlin.
Why did influential countries such as India, South Africa or Vietnam abstain from the relevant UN resolutions calling on Russia to end its illegal invasion? These questions deserve an answer. When I talk to leaders from those countries, many assure me that they are not questioning the underlying principles of our international order. What they are struggling with is the unequal application of those principles. What they expect is representation on equal terms and an end to Western double standards. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that all of these claims are always justified. But we must address them if we want to encourage the powers in Asia, Africa and the Americas to join us in building and defending a stable global order. In Hiroshima, the G7 will assure Ukraine of our unwavering support for as long as it takes. Take steps toward creating secure and resilient economies based on partnerships with the global South. And act on the challenges faced by developing and emerging markets, ranging from the urgent threat of the climate crisis to the critical need for infrastructure. I will also remain personally committed to working towards a more inclusive, more equitable global order, particularly when it comes to our neighboring continent, Africa.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said that Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky had agreed to meet a group of African leaders to discuss a potential peace plan for the conflict. Details of the plan have not been publicly divulged, although Ukraine's stated position for any peace deal is that all Russian troops must withdraw from its territory. The peace plan is also backed by African leaders of Senegal, Uganda, Egypt, the Republic of the Congo and Zambia.
Two leaders that I had occasion to speak to, that is President Putin and President Zelensky, agreed that they would be willing to receive a mission of the African heads of states in both Moscow and Kyiv. I agreed with both of them that we would commence with the preparations for the engagements with these African heads of state. My discussions with the two leaders demonstrated that they are both ready to receive the African leaders and to have a discussion on how this conflict can be brought to an end. Whether that will succeed or not is going to depend on the discussions that will be held.
Joining me for more is security expert and international affairs analyst David Otto. It's good to see you, David. So many things are happening relating to what's going on in Ukraine. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said influential countries such as India, Vietnam and South Africa still hesitating to criticize Russia's invasion because they believe international principles are not applied equally. My question is, if they should criticize Russia's doings, will that make Russia stop this, what they call special military operation? And secondly, do you share their views that, international principles are not being applied equally?
I think, the German Chancellor, this war has been going out for more than a year. And of course, there is this idea, which, is being, what I call an ideology by the Western nations and NATO allies, that your enemy is my enemy or my enemy is your enemy. And I think, this kind of a bipolar system of geopolitics is something that is troubling a lot of these countries like India, of course, like South Africa and many other African countries. You remember that, there has been two UN security votes in terms of one that was in 2022 in March, one that condemned Russia's invasion. We had about 17 African countries that abstained. And the latest one in 2023 March, where, the UN Security Council was asking for these countries to, pressure Russia to withdraw its forces. And then you still had, about 32 countries that abstained from that vote or refused to vote. It tells you a lot. And, the point which, of course, the German Chancellor is making is that there's been a lot of double standards in terms of how, the West, sees this crisis and how it has treated other crises in the world. And this is not something that is acceptable. Of course, we know that geopolitics is all about interest. So it's all about the interest of these African countries as well, interest of countries like India. South Africa has been one of the countries that has pushed forward, in the very early days about a peace plan. But of course, it was rejected, by, allies to Ukraine, and saying that, of course, that they were not interested in any peace. And what we've seen generally is that, there has been much more escalation of this conflict rather than de-escalation. And most African countries, are in to support a peaceful process and a peaceful plan. They don't want to support any war plans. And perhaps this is where the problem is.
Just last week, the U.S. ambassador to South Africa, Ruben Brigetti, accused South Africa of supplying weapons to Russia. Do you think it's true?
Well, first of all, the U.S. ambassador has also apologized and said, of course, that, he didn't really mean it in that form. There hasn't been any evidence to demonstrate that, South Africa has supplied weapons to. This is another double standard because, the U.S. has been supporting and sending weapons to Ukraine. South Africa was one of the first countries that called in for a peaceful settlement, called in for a dialogue between Russia and Ukraine to end the conflict. That was rejected. If South Africa, to support Russia in one way or the other, perhaps, political friends. Remember, Russia played a very role then Soviet Union during the apartheid. It fought against, it provided weapons and support and training to the then ANC part South African apartheid regime. So South Africa has all the right, and they may make a very geopolitical interest-based decision to send weapons to Russia if they do deem fit. So I don't think there's a problem there because all the countries are sending weapons to Ukraine. What I think we should be interested in is looking for peace, rather than escalation of this crisis.
And talking about peace, we understand that there is a representative from China visiting Europe and, of course, Ukraine as well. And then we just heard about the group of African leaders who are discussing a potential peace plan. Are you optimistic?
Well, it depends on, I mean, the conflict here, it's not just a conflict of, one side. I mean, it's not just about Russia. It's also not just about Ukraine. Both sides have to agree to a peace plan. Countries like Turkey had tried a peace plan before. China itself had proposed, some, points in terms of how best to go about the peaceful process. That has been rejected so far. I don't think the West or NATO allies are interested in peace, because, of course, there is, some incentive, as we've seen, practically in sending more weapons and, to Ukraine. Russia itself, I don't think Russia is interested in any peace that would allow its forces to withdraw from Ukraine. So it's all about the details. Who is going to accept what? Is Ukraine going to accept Russia taking its territory? Is Russia going to accept Ukraine threatening its borders by becoming a member of NATO? So all these dynamics, realization of a peace plan, it's not just talking about how that peace plan is going to play out and what is the outcome of it. So optimistic, but again, it's down to the details.
Quite right. We'll keep monitoring those developments. We'd like to appreciate your time. Thank you, David Otto, for joining us on the program.
Thank you.